Every closed door hides a secret. But some secrets leave a trail of blood. I'm Elias Williams. For years, I hunted the truth for the headlines. Now, I dig past the front pages to find what they missed. Welcome to the archive. We are the architects of our own hauntings. We build cathedrals out of pixels and pray to the algorithm for a mercy it isn't programmed to feel. Meet Elena Voss, the patron saint of the perfect morning. Every morning at 5:14 a.m., the light in this house was weaponized. It wasn't just decor, it was a boundary. In the world of the Voss family, if a shadow fell across the frame, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of the soul, and that's the secret, guys. Inner peace isn't something you find, it's something you curate. You have to breathe through in those 3 seconds, the happiness filter evaporated. The porcelain cracked. You aren't looking at an influencer anymore. You're looking at a hostage of her own aesthetic. Listen, do you hear that? That isn't a heartbeat. That's the house breathing. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She did what 1.2 million people expected her to do. She reset the frame. She smiled back into the void, and the void liked the post. But the digital ghost was already out of the machine. This is the paradox of the ideal family. To keep the world believing in the dream, you have to burn the reality as fuel. The more light we saw on our screens, the darker the corners of that glass house became. Digital anomalies aren't just technical errors, they are the truth trying to leak out. We love to watch. We love to scroll. We love the feeling of a life that looks like a perfume ad. But as the sun set on the Voss estate that final evening, the subscribers were still typing goals in the comments, while the locks were being engaged from the inside. The stories didn't stop because she ran out of things to say. They stopped because the filter couldn't hide the blood anymore. Let's look at what you missed. Time has a different texture at 3 in the morning. It becomes thin, brittle. It is the hour when the mask of the daylight world slips and the digital subconscious begins to vomit its secrets into the cloud. At 3:14 a.m., while the world slept in the comfort of curated memories, a 15-second glitch appeared. No, hey guys, no soft focus transitions, just a door. A barrier between the living room and the earth beneath it. The caption was a eulogy wrapped in a status update. Finally quiet. 2 words that carry the weight of a spent scream. It wasn't an invitation, it was a period at the end of a sentence. Listen to the silence of that recording. It's a dense, suffocating thing. You can hear the coldness of the basement air bleeding through the cracks in the frame. It's the sound of a house that has finally stopped pretending to be a home. It vanished in for minutes, purged, scrubbed, a digital sin deleted before the sun could witness it. But the internet is a graveyard that never stays buried. Somewhere, in a darkened bedroom, a stranger pressed record. Digital preservation is our modern form of obsession. We archive the anomalies. We zoom in until the pixels break, searching for a ghost in the noise. And there, in the bottom left corner, we found it. A single, discarded sock, a child's toy, and the shadow of someone standing just out of reach of the sensor. The perfect Voss aesthetic had finally encountered something it couldn't color grade away, the reality of a locked room. By the time the sun rose, the video was gone. But the silence it left behind that was deafening. The hunt for Elena Voss didn't start with a police report, it started with a notification. In the language of modern luxury, silence is the ultimate currency. We call it minimalism, but look closer at these open floor plans. There are no walls to hide the truth, so you have to bury it in the open air. Evidence rarely shouts. It whispers from the periphery. In a video titled Sunday Reset, the viewers didn't look at Elena's smoothie. They looked at the chrome. There, reflected in a toaster, was a shattered floor-to-ceiling mirror. A mirror doesn't shatter into 1,000 pieces because of a dropped book, as Mark claimed in the comments. It shatters from the impact of a body, a sudden, violent interruption of the aesthetic piece. We are trained to look at the light, at the center of the frame where the skin is smooth and the eyes are bright. But the architecture of a lie depends on the blur. It depends on what you are willing to ignore in the background. While she spoke of hydration and renewal, he was moving through the house like a ghost preparing a shroud. A heavy roll of polyethylene, transparent, airtight, a material designed to preserve or to conceal. The sound of plastic stretching is the sound of a vacuum. It is a sterile, suffocating noise. In that moment, the skincare routine became a countdown. The audience felt the chill, even if they couldn't name the fear. This house wasn't built for living, it was built for viewing. Every corner is a camera angle, every room is a stage. And on a stage, if you aren't the lead actor, you are simply a prop to be moved or discarded. They say houses have memories, but in the Voss home, the walls were too clean to hold a stain. The architecture remained silent, but the digital archives began to scream. We believe our homes are our fortresses. We fill them with smart things, inviting the ghost into the machine, never realizing that a fortress is just a prison with a better view. Elena Voss lived in a web woven from light and code. Underneath the linen was the shadow. Deep in the digital underground, Elena found a corner where the happiness filter didn't work. A burner account, a digital flare sent up from a sinking ship that looked, from the outside, like a yacht. "Is it violence if he never touches me?" she asked the void. "Is it abuse if the house itself is the one hurting me?" She was describing a new kind of haunting. A poltergeist that required a Wi-Fi password to manifest its malice. Mark didn't need to raise his voice. He just lowered the temperature. He turned their minimalist sanctuary into a meat locker, using a smartphone app to freeze her out of her own living room. A digital winter triggered by a thumb swipe. He watched her through the eyes of baby monitors in rooms where no babies slept. Every sigh, every sob, every whispered prayer was captured, uploaded, and analyzed. He wasn't just a husband. He was a sysadmin of her soul. Then came the locks. The home security system became a home incarceration unit. Geofencing meant the doors only opened when his phone was nearby. She was a guest in a house that had been programmed to forget her. This is the digital paper trail. Not a letter hidden in a drawer, but a log of IP addresses and time-stamped commands. A record of a man who realized that in 2026, you don't need a cage if you have an administrator password. Elena wasn't disappearing. She was being deleted, one permission at a time. And as the logs show, the system update was scheduled for the night the stories ended. Perfection is an exhausting performance. It requires a constant, violent suppression of the human element. But 7 days before the silence, the performance began to fail. The beige didn't just fade, it rotted. The aesthetic shift was subtle at first, a change in the color grade, a lack of eyeliner. But to those who speak the language of social media, it was a siren. The glow was gone, replaced by the hollow, gray light of a storm that had already arrived. And then there was Mark. He ceased being the cameraman and became the set piece. He appeared in every frame, a shadow that refused to leave the light. His hand always found her, anchoring her, claiming her, ensuring she didn't drift out of the narrative. It is the grip of a man who views his wife as an asset under management, a proprietary piece of hardware that is malfunctioning. In his eyes, she wasn't a woman in pain. She was a brand in decline. Then came the final live, the moment the digital wall didn't just crack, it collapsed. Elena sat before her thousands of friends, her thousands of strangers, and for a heartbeat, she let the mask fall. She began to cry. It was the most honest thing ever recorded in that house. "You're ruining the brand." In the economy of the Voss family, her tears weren't a call for help. They were a budget deficit. They were a liability that had to be liquidated. The red flags weren't just in the background, they were the entire color palette. The fans watched the slow-motion collision of a soul against a business plan. They commented, they shared, and they waited for the next upload, not realizing they were watching a crime scene in progress. The brand was saved, but the woman was gone. The stories didn't stop because she lost interest. They stopped because the brand decided she was no longer a necessary part of the image. April in the Pacific Northwest is a season of damp shadows and false starts. For 48 hours, the digital pulse of the Voss estate went flat. No morning rituals, no evening reflections. Just a terrifying, unscripted void. The internet is a hungry ghost. It does not tolerate silence. When the stories stopped, the panic didn't start with a scream. It started with a lack of data. 1 million people realized simultaneously that the feed had run dry. When the law finally breached the perimeter, they didn't find a crime scene at first. They found a museum, a shrine to the ideal. The air inside was static, smelling of expensive candles and the metallic tang of a failing of a system. Flashlights are cruel narrators. They ignore the filters and the carefully placed succulents. They find the jagged edges. They reveal the perfect family paradox for what it was, a thin veneer of drywall over an abyss of domestic dread. They moved toward the master suite, leaving the curated world behind. Every step upward felt like a descent into something primal. The architecture was still modern, but the energy was ancient. The energy of a cornered thing. Then, the breakdown became physical. The master bedroom was a frantic rebuttal to the living room's lie. Here, the beige was stained. Here, the symmetry was murdered. The ring light, the sun of their digital solar system, lay shattered on the rug. Digital threats always eventually manifest in the physical world. You cannot color grade a struggle. You cannot edit out the scent of copper and adrenaline. The stories ended because the reality had finally become too loud to ignore. The camera was still watching. It had seen the final act. It was the only witness that didn't have a brand to protect, and it was hungry to tell the truth. We have reached the era of the post-mortem persona. In 2026, a heartbeat is no longer a requirement for a conversation. When the physical Elena ceased to breathe, her digital ghost was drafted into service for one final, desperate performance. Mark didn't just hide the body, he tried to animate the spirit. He fed thousands of hours of Elena's vlogs, her laughter, her sighs, her intimate goodnights, into a machine. He was harvesting her essence to build a lie that could speak. The alibi was a sequence of bits. A voice note sent to a mother's phone at 10 p.m. A digital "I'm okay." It was the ultimate happiness filter, a mask that could mimic the frequency of a daughter's love. Listen to the perfection of the syntax. There is no tremor in the vocal cords, no atmospheric weight. It is a voice stripped of humanity, scrubbed of the very soul it was meant to represent. It is the sound of a puppet made of light. But algorithms are historians, not poets. They understand phonetics, but they do not understand the secret language of a family. Mark commanded the AI to use Elena's childhood nickname, Lulu, but the machine missed the inflection. To a mother, a mispronunciation is a scream. That single flat L was a digital fingerprint left at the scene. It was the moment the perfect alibi hit the uncanny valley and plummeted. The machine spoke the word, but it didn't know the memory. He had mastered the aesthetic, the lighting, and the surveillance. But he forgot that a voice is more than a frequency. It is a history. And you cannot clone a history that you have spent years trying to erase. The silence returned, but this time, it was the mother who was watching the feed. And she knew that the girl in the voice note was already a ghost. There is a silent, private purgatory tucked away deep inside every modern smartphone. It is a graveyard of abandoned intentions we call the drafts folder. This digital space serves as a holding cell for the things we are too afraid to voice, waiting for a courage that may never actually arrive. When investigators began their search, they didn't find a traditional diary bound in leather. Instead, they discovered 212 hidden, unedited video files. These were moments where the persona of the sustainable soulmate stopped performing for the world and began testifying to the shadows of her own home. Elena Voss was a master of the color grade. She understood that a specific hex code of peach could perfectly hide a painful, yellow-green hematoma. She used the professional-grade tools of her trade to perform a digital autopsy on her own living body, documenting every detail in chilling 4K resolution. Watch the slider move slowly across the screen interface. It is easily the most honest movement ever recorded in the history of her social channel. With every percentage point of the filter she dropped, the polished brand died, and the true victim finally began to emerge from the pixels. She was ironically using the tools of vanity to preserve the cold evidence of her own destruction, turning her camera into a silent, forensic witness. But here is the haunting detail that kept the detectives awake at night. In the final weeks, she didn't just record the physical evidence. She would sit for hours in front of the lens, keeping the happiness filter engaged while she sobbed in the total darkness of her room. She wasn't just filming evidence for the police. She was using the AI algorithms to see the woman she was supposed to be. She was looking into a forensic mirror, using a filter to hold onto a version of herself that wasn't broken by her daily reality. This was a digital ghost of her own joy, a simulated smile masking a spirit that had been shattered long ago by fear. This wasn't content for an audience. It was a digital scream kept in a vacuum, echoing through the cold circuitry of a mobile device. She had built a library of her own pain, filed under unsent, waiting for someone to find the secret password to her private prison. The drafts were finally published, not to her millions of followers, but to a jury sitting in a quiet, somber courtroom. The happiness filter had finally failed her. The raw truth was much harder to look at than any curated image she ever posted. We are a civilization of watchers. We sit in our own darkened rooms, consuming the light of others, convinced that we are seeing the truth because the resolution is high. But a high-definition image is just a more detailed lie. When the cracks began to show, we didn't call for help. We called for an encore. We processed her pain through the lens of entertainment, assuming that if it was being filmed, it must be for our amusement. We turned her tragedy into a content arc. The spectator has a unique kind of blindness. We see the atrocious, but because it is framed in aesthetic gold, we label it as art. We voted on her misery as if it were a plot point in a streaming drama. Listen to the sound of a million scrolls. It is the sound of apathy disguised as engagement. We saw the hand on the shoulder. We heard the whisper in the background. And we typed goals because we wanted the dream more than we wanted the woman. We dismissed her cries as engagement bait. In a world where attention is the only currency, we assumed her suffering was just a marketing strategy to beat the algorithm. We weaponized our skepticism to protect our comfort. Every like was a nail in the coffin of her reality. We incentivized the performance until there was no room left for the person. The audience didn't just watch the crime. We funded the stage it was committed on. This is the trial of the spectator. We are not just witnesses, we are the jury of the feed. And our verdict was silence. We looked at the happiness filter and chose to believe it, because the truth would have required us to put down our phones. The aesthetic was perfect, the lighting was flawless. But while we were waiting for the next upload, the light went out for good, and we just kept scrolling. All empires of image eventually crumble into the soil that bore them. The glass house, once a beacon of aspirational light, has returned to what it always was, a collection of cold surfaces and silent angles waiting for the dust to reclaim the stage. There is a specific kind of horror in a clean room that should be messy. In the absence of life, the Voss aesthetic has finally achieved its goal: total, sterile perfection. A monument to a woman who is edited out of her own existence. We archive the tragedy, we tag the trauma, and then we move to the next tab. Our digital memory is a sieve holding only the sharpest shards of grief before they, too, are washed away by the relentless tide of the new. We are a generation of voyeurs, obsessed with the what if but terrified of the what is. We watched the light in those windows for years, never realizing that a house made entirely of windows offers nowhere for the soul to hide ... when the predator is already inside. The feed is dead, the servers have moved on. The algorithm has already found a new ideal family to feed to the masses. Another beige living room, another morning routine, another silent cry for help buried under a high bitrate upload. And here is the true crown of the martyr, a halo made of cheap LED discs and broken promises. It sits in the rot, a discarded sun that could illuminate a face but could never truly see the person behind the skin. It flickers one last time, a reflex of a dying machine, a final, desperate attempt to capture the attention it was built to crave. But there is no one left to like this moment. The spectators have all gone home. In a world of 24/7 surveillance, where every shadow is tracked and every sigh is recorded, the only person no one is watching is the person holding the lens. Stay safe out there. The file is closed for now, but the questions remain. What is your theory? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to step into the shadows with me again, make sure to subscribe. I'm Elias Williams. Trust no one and stay safe. Good night.